Hello, Buffalo Public Schools social studies teachers. I am Timothy Lent from New Visions for Public Schools, and this is a workshop on the new U.S. History Regents exam. I was supposed to be with you in person for the April Superintendent's Day conferences, but at least one of those is definitely canceled, and possibly the second one as well. So instead, I'm going to record this video on the new U.S. History Regents exam, and you can access all the resources through this presentation. If we're lucky enough to see each other in person this spring, we'll do something similar with more interactive activities. But until then, here's some information for you to think about as the district prepares to get students ready for the new U.S. History exam for the first administration by the district in June 2021. So you can access this presentation and all the resources linked into it by going to this tiny URL link at the bottom. Again, I work for New Visions for Public Schools. Many of you have met me and are familiar with the curriculum already, but if not, you can go to the curriculum site, which is here at the middle of the screen, curriculum.newvisions.org/social-studies. You can also reach out to me at any point with any questions about this presentation or anything else related to global history or US history, especially the New Visions curriculum, at tlent@newvisions.org. So let's get started. Just a few goals for our workshop here today. The first is to understand the timeline and transition towards the new Regents exam. Second, unpack the design of that exam. And then the third is to explore some of the resources that we have to offer that'll help you with the new exam. There's also 3 important sites and documents linked here at the bottom of the page. The first is the curriculum, the New Visions Social Studies curriculum. The second is a document where all of the updates from NYSED you can find. Right here is that document. And then the last is the Office of State Assessment website. Not a lot of people go to this website, but this is where you can get all the information about the new exam. And I'm actually going to pause right here and just go to the website. So New Visions does not have any inside information on the new US History exam. We are basing all of our presentations, all of our resources on what's publicly available. And what's publicly available is all found here on the Office of State Assessment site. You go to Social Studies and then to the US History Regents exam framework. And as I scroll down, there's just a few things I want to highlight here. Just recently, they posted 2 sets of anchor papers for a part 2 short essays, which we'll be talking about later, but I want you to know where they are now. Right here, set 1 and set 2. So if you're wondering what the rubric looks like, or if you want to see what some example papers for part 2 look like, you can come to this site and you see it here. The other most important documents are the educator's guide and the prototype itself. So let me open up these just real quick so you know what they are. The prototype came out at the beginning of the year. It is our only example of the new US History Regents exam. And it shows you what stimulus-based multiple choice questions for part 1 look like. You can see some examples for part 2 short essays. Here they are. And then there is a civic literacy essay. That's the last part of the exam. So you can take a look at this prototype if you want to see what the exam will look like. In addition, the educator's guide is kind of the culmination of all the information that's been put out so far. This has got the description of all of the terms used on the exam, description of the exam itself, some of the standards documents that are used to create the exam. This has also got rubrics, and it's the #1 best resource for you to study up on to know about the exam. So don't forget, all of that stuff is here at the New York State Education Department's Office of State Assessment website. And that's linked here on the second slide of the presentation. So let's go over some of the information that the state's put out already. First, the timeline for the new exam. Here we are getting students ready for June 2020 Regents exams. The very first administration of the new US history exam comes out June 2nd of this year. Now, I'm recording this on March 25th. We haven't heard anything about the Regents exam being canceled yet due to the COVID-19 virus, but we'll see what happens. But that doesn't really affect Buffalo Public School teachers because the district has decided not to take the new framework exam this June. Instead, they're going to continue to take the traditional US history exam until June 2021. That's the first time BPS is going to administer the new exam. Got it? All right. Let's talk about the format of the exam. There are 3 parts, and here we've got the current exam over here on the left. It is based on this 1999 resource guide content standards. It's 50 multiple choice questions, some of which have stimuli, some of which don't, a thematic essay, and a DBQ essay. We are very familiar with that exam. Unlike the global exam, there is no transition exam for US history. There would just be 2 different exams. The current one, the 50 multiple choice questions, and then the new exam, which is listed over here on the right-hand side. This is based on a new standards document that came out in 2014, the New York State Social Studies Framework. There's a link to it there. If you're unfamiliar with it, you should read up. There are some changes between the old standards document and the new framework, so check that out. The parts of the exam, part 1, instead of 50 multiple choice questions, it's 28, and each of those questions are based on a stimulus. Part 2 is the short essay question section that replaces the thematic essay. And then the last part is the only long form essay on the exam, the civic literacy document-based essay. So let's take a look at each of these parts in a little more depth, starting with part 1, stimulus-based multiple choice questions. As the name suggests, every single one of these questions is related to a stimulus. And in this case, stimuli could be a map, an excerpt of legislation, a political cartoon, a poem, a graph. It could even be 2 stimuli. They might put 2 things up and ask students to answer questions about them. Students are going to get between 2 to 3 questions, maybe even 4 on some of these stimuli. And it's important to know that many of them will require outside information. They call them stimulus-based, but it's more like stimulus-related. Instead of just being able to answer the question based on the document, you're going to have to bring in your outside information to answer these questions. So these stimulus-based multiple choice questions, they're based on a set of 18 task models. A task model is a description of what a question should look like. And the state gives these task models to teachers who write items for the Regents exam. And then it's up to them to interpret those task models and write these items. So if you're interested in finding out what these task models look like, all 18, you can go to the Office of State Assessment site that I showed earlier. Or if you're looking for an even more helpful document and you maybe want to write your own, or maybe you want to use some of these prompts, give a click here to these task model prompts. Now, we got these prompts from teachers who write items for the state. They shared it at one of the state conferences, and it's very, very helpful. It's kind of like gold if you're going to write any assessment items for this new test. Let me zoom in a little bit. All right, so the way this is laid out is there is the number of the task model and a brief description of it. The actual task model description is much longer than this, but they've shortened it. And then that's followed by some prompts you might want to use for questions. So for task model 1, best use, could be the best use of this piece of evidence would be, and then you could finish it up. And you can see that they have prompts for all the task models. And so I suggest taking a look through these and maybe pulling out some questions you might want to use in class. Whether you're going to be writing your own questions, or if maybe you want students to write questions themselves for upcoming exams, or if you want to incorporate some of these into questions you ask about documents. For example, task model 2, sourcing. To whom was the author addressing this comment? Maybe that's something you want to ask students regularly throughout class. The intended audience of this document is blank. So there are some suggestions in here for what you might want to address with your students. Task models. All right, so here's an example. Here's one question from the new prototype exam. We've got an excerpt from the decision in McCullough versus Maryland. And the question is, which constitutional provision was used by Chief Justice Marshall to reach this conclusion? This is stimulus question 4. Students are given a stimulus and asked to select a plausible claim that logically flows from evidence presented. And the answer is elastic clause. And I like this example because it's an example of a question that is stimulus related. The answer, elastic clause, is not in this document. Students have to know their outside information to get this right. It's not just a reading test. So just to give you, everyone who does global history or is familiar with global history, some comparison here. This is the same task models, same kinds of questions that you find in global history on that Regents exam, just it's on US history content. US history teachers have the benefit that global teachers went first. And so we can take a look here and see some of the things we found out from the first 3 administrations of the global exam. From the global exam, we realized that actually there's been no data-based questions asked. So none of the stimuli have been charts or graphs for global. It's not to say that they won't happen for US history. US history traditionally has some more graphs than global does. But this is just a breakdown of the types of documents you'll see. I think the most important thing to come out of our analysis is this information on the bottom. In the first administration of the global exam, 50% of the questions required outside information for students to get correct. Then in August, 60% of the multiple choice questions required outside information to get correct. And then January 2020, it was 71% of the questions required outside information. So that means, there's only like 30% of the questions, 29% of the questions that students could get just based on the documents if they were proficient readers. So you can correct any of your colleagues who say this is turned into a reading test. It includes a lot of reading, that's right, but it's still a content-driven exam. Students have to know their history if they're going to do well on these new exams. That's certainly the case for global, and I suspect it will be the case for US history. Let's talk about part 2. Part 2 is the section of the exam that is the most different from any other US history exam we've had in New York State history. Here's how it's laid out. Students get 2 sets of paired documents. 4 documents total, but they're not together. So there's one set, and then there's a second set. And these, at least so far on the prototype, have always been primary sources. We suspect they'll continue to be primary sources. So students will be required to answer the questions in short essays. That's 2 to 3 paragraphs each, but no intro or conclusion. So just in this section, students have to do 2 short essays, 2 to 3 paragraphs each. Luckily, just like on the global exam, the prompt never changes. So at least that's something we can rely on. The documents will change, but the prompts will not. So let's take a look at the first prompt. The first set for part 2 will look like this. Students are given 2 documents. They won't be set side by side like this. They'll be on separate pages, but this is their task. Describe the historical context surrounding these documents. Identify and explain the relationship between the events and or ideas found in these documents. And they give 3 options for the type of relationship students can write about. They can write about a cause and effect connection. They can compare the 2 documents or the ideas in them through similarities or differences. Or they can talk about a turning point that the 2 documents are related to. The best sets of these part 2s have multiple options where students could write about cause and effect or turning point, or maybe they can also throw in similarity or difference. All right, so that's first set. The second set has the same first bullet. Describe the historical context surrounding documents 1 and 2. So this is totally different set of documents, totally different prompt, another 2 to 3 paragraph essay. Describe the historical context surrounding these 2 documents, and then analyze document 2 and explain how audience or purpose or bias or point of view affects this document's use as a reliable source of evidence. It's not always going to be document 2. Just in the prototype, they chose document 2, but they will always say which document it is. So students should get used to the possibility that they'll have to source document 1 and explain how that sourcing affects its use as a reliable source of evidence. This second bullet on sourcing is the one thing that we don't even cover in global entirely. In global, on the CRQ, students are asked to identify audience, purpose, bias, and point of view for a document, but they're not asked to go to the next step, which is evaluate the reliability of the source. So this is totally new for students. And it's definitely something that high school US history teachers are going to have to focus on unless they know that their global teachers did it too. Part 2 of the exam is actually the part that we have the most information about. SED has not put out a ton of information on this exam. We don't have everything we need for part 3, which I'll get into more in a second, but we do have quite a bit for part 2. So let's go to the OSA website, and I'll click on those 2 links that I didn't click on before, where we've got rubrics, we've got anchor papers. If we were doing this in real life, not virtually, we would be spending some time doing some norming with these part 2 anchor papers. So since we're not, I recommend that you take the time this summer at least to look over some of these resources. All right, here I am on the Office of State Assessment website. I'm going to scroll down until I see this part 2 stimulus-based short essay questions sample student papers. And they are descriptively labeled set 1 and set 2. So give these a click. I'll show you just what's in one of them. All right, here I am looking at set 1, sample student papers. I'm just going to scroll through some of this introductory information as we get down to the bottom. All right, so here we've got the documents that are used in this set, and then they present the rubric to you. And you'll notice that the rubric language used in these part 2s, and actually part 3 when we get to that, is very similar to the thematic essay or DBQ rubrics. So these shouldn't be all that different to what you're used to. Just consider like this first bullet on context. It's kind of what you would expect to see in a first body paragraph or in the beginning of a body paragraph of a really well-developed essay. And then of course for part 1, there is the relationship between the 2. So there's the rubric there. They've got some notes here about what you could pull from the document, some outside information you might use. There are some tools here that you can use for norming, which we would use if we were together. And then there are some anchor papers. So please take a look through these anchor papers to figure out what the state is expecting students to do for each of these sets, for set 1 and set 2, with special attention to set 2. We are still learning exactly what the state expects. We've been through a lot of presentations with them, and we're not getting a lot of clear information, especially about set 2 and this second bullet about reliability. So what we're probably gonna have to wait and do is just wait and see what these first 3 administrations of the Regents exam look like. Really analyze the papers that they award 5s and 4s to, and we'll have to decide as a community of teachers what expressing a document's use as reliable evidence really looks like. But I guess that's something that's good about what Buffalo Public School is doing this year, deciding to forego taking the first administration of this exam so that we can take a look at some of the administrations before diving in. So you'll have seen 2 by the time you start in September. Just a quick comparison between global history and US history, part 2. Same skills, they're working on the same skills with the exception of reliability, but this section of the exam between US history and global and US history show the best progression of skills between the two exams. For example, on global history, students are expected to really just write one or two sentences about context and sourcing and a relationship between 2 documents. And they're given a question for each one of those steps. Whereas in US history, students are expected to use all those skills, but to put them into 2 to 3 body paragraphs. All right, let's talk about part 3, the only full essay on the new US history exam. This is the civic literacy document-based essay, civic literacy essay, everyone's calling it. For this one, students are given 6 documents, and students are told what civic issue or constitutional issue they're going to address in their essay. The prototype was African American civil rights. Students have to use 4 documents in their essay, and each document has a constructive response question. So in global, for the enduring issues essay, we got rid of those constructive response questions, but they are back for US history, so students could get some more points there. The prompts will be almost the same every year. There are 2 versions of this prompts. It depends on what the topic is and it changes, but it's only that last bullet that changes. I guess one of the biggest things is that our old DBQ, students were given 3 topics and they had to write about 2 of them. For this, all of the documents, all 6 documents will be about the same topic. And using those documents and their outside information, they have to address these 3 bullets. Describe the historical circumstances surrounding this constitutional or civic issue. Explain efforts to address this constitutional or civic issue by individuals, groups, and or governments, and discuss the extent to which these efforts were successful. That 3rd bullet changes depending on the topic. Sometimes it's discuss the extent to which these efforts were successful, and sometimes it's discuss the extent that these efforts impacted American society or the United States. So it's impact versus evaluation of success. A couple things I want to point out about this prompt. We have one of those little secret plurals that this Regents has always used and that have really frustrated quite a few of our students and quite a few of our teachers in the grading room. That 2nd bullet, explain efforts to address this constitutional or civic issue. Students have to write about it, 2 of them. They have to write about 2 efforts, 2. There is a rubric. It's posted on the Office of State Assessment website also. It's the same, it's really similar to the DBQ rubric. It looks almost the same in terms of language and scale, 0 to 5. And here's just a comparison. I described some of this already. For global history, it's 5 documents, no scaffolding questions, and the students pick their own topic. They pick their own enduring issue that they see in those documents. Whereas on the US history exam, the civic literacy DBQ, students will be told what topic they're going to write about. All the documents are about that topic. 6 documents, have to use 4, and it includes scaffolding questions. If you want some more information or one place where you can find all this information distilled in one document, give a click to one of these 2 images in the presentation and you'll get our memo. That's to all instructional leaders and teachers. And then you can also get one that's specific for US history. That's very helpful. Here's some questions to consider while you're digesting everything that's in this presentation. What does the new test design mean for your teaching or your co-teaching? What are you going to have to change? What can stay the same? What are you thinking about with regards to your approach to Regents prep from day 1, which we highly encourage? I think students should get in the process of reviewing content that they've learned early in the year, so it's not such a shock at the end of the year when they're asked to review everything. What skills are you most prepared to unpack with your students? Do you feel comfortable teaching students about reliability? Do you feel comfortable teaching about sourcing, about context? And if not, you should explore some of the resources we have and that other organizations have put together to get yourself ready. And what skills do you think you'll need to think through before you begin unpacking them in the classroom? Maybe just to do a little self-assessment. What am I ready to teach? What am I not so ready to teach? All right, now we at New Visions, myself, particularly my colleague Aruna Patel, who writes the US history curriculum, we've been working pretty hard this year to meet the needs of teachers who are getting students prepared for the new exam on June 2nd. So you'll have the benefit of that year plus whatever we put together this summer after the first exam. So let's take a look at a few things. I'm going to go over what the resources are, and then I'm going to go to the website and show you where some of them are. So the first thing you can use are our assessment materials. I think the assessments that we've put together are the most important resource you can use. Putting assessments together, writing assessment items, it takes a ton of time. We've had a lot of experience doing it for global and now US history. So please, before you make your own assessment items, before you write your own exams, check out our website. It's there for you to use, to modify and change however you need. All of our assessment items and our assessments are under lockdown. We have a little security on them, mainly because we put a curriculum on the internet and it took like 2 days for students to find it and find the answers, and in some cases sell them to their friends. So we have a little process. If you're not already signed up, you can click here in the presentation, and then you fill out this form with some information that we ask for: your name, your school district, your school email, and then a Google email address. Your school email address, those are all mine, would be the one from your district. That's how we know that you're a teacher. You got to provide your BPS school email address there. And then your Google email address could be a school one if it works for Google, or it could be a personal one. You can fill this out as many times as you need to make sure that we've got all of your Google accounts that you might use on your computer. And then there's the little question if you want to be added to our newsletter. I would. We put out a lot of updates, and then hit submit. So then after you've done that, it may take a day or a few days if it's a weekend for me to do it, but I go through all those responses, check to see if there are any students, don't admit the students, and then if everyone's a teacher, admit the teachers. So once you fill that out, you'll have access to all the assessments. I'm going to show you where those are on the website in just a little bit, but just know that we have assessment items for parts 1, 2, and 3 for every single unit in the curriculum, and we have end of unit assessments for every unit as well. These end of unit assessments are cumulative. That means that each of the exams has questions from previous units on it. We do that so that students get used to reviewing content throughout the year, and when they get to the end of the year, the Regents exam won't be such a shock that there are questions from units 1, 2, and 3 on there. So assessments. The second thing that we've got are instructional routines. Instructional routines are processes we encourage people to go through in their classes um, to work on some of these most important skills for the Regents exam. We have one called a writing check-in cycle. That's for developing writing skills with your students. We have one called the contextualization routine, a sourcing routine, and a civic issues essay routine. These are fun. If you've been in any of the global history workshops I've done for BPS, we've done a bunch of these routines in those workshops. If I get a chance to do it with US history teachers this year, we'll do some as well. But you can check that out, take you to the website in just a minute. The last thing you need to know about resources we have for you are all on the Regents Readiness section of the site. Even though it says Regents Readiness, this is not something you check out in March or April before the exam. These are the kinds of resources you want to be using from day one. So take a look before the start of the school year to see what we've got. We've got info on the exam, an exam question bank I'm going to highlight in a minute. All the assessments are linked to this page, including writing resources and feedback tools. All right, so we're going to go to the website. And then we're going to come back for this. All right, the website for anyone who is uninformed is curriculum.newvisions.org. Bookmark it, curriculum.newvisions.org. All right, so here I am on the curriculum site. This is the home page for all the curriculum that we've written. There might be a pop-up. I'm going to click on social studies. That's what we're here to talk about today. And then I'm going to take you to three parts of the site. First, I mentioned assessments. So I want to show you how this would look if you were going to go from a unit page. So let's say I'm teaching US history and I'm working on this unit, unit number 7, prosperity and depression. I'll go to the site, and as I scroll down through the unit, there's a description of what the unit looks like. Here's our friendly little pop-up. That won't be up there all the time. There's a link to the unit plan, and then there are all these expandable boxes, and we have them in order so that we can encourage backwards design. So the assessment items come first, followed by the beginning of the unit, introduction and vocabulary, followed by some of the topics, Roaring Twenties, Harlem Renaissance, and so on. So since I'm talking about assessments, I'm going to give a click here in this first expandable box, Framework Aligned US Assessment Bank, developed in partnership with CUNY, Debating US History. We've been working with that organization this year to help us with our assessments. So if you want some assessment items that are for each of these units, you can check out these links here. I'm going to get to them through another portal through our exam question bank in just a minute. So I'm going to keep these unclicked. I'm going to hide this item and go to end of unit assessments. All right, so you'll see that there are quite a few items in this expandable box. There are 2 sets of assessments here. There are assessments aligned to the new exam. That's what these first 2 links are. And then there are assessments aligned to the old exam. So next year, you're not going to be using these ones below here. You're going to be using the first 2 items. The first 2 items are the exam itself and then the teacher materials that go along with the exam. So here I am, it opened up into a box, and there is a reminder here to teachers that we have this assessment under some security. So if you can't access it, you need to fill out the form right here, but you already filled that out because you stopped the webinar early and clicked on it. So to open up your assessment, click Open Resources, the purple button. All right, now that it's loaded, I'm going to scroll down a little bit. You'll see the first few pages are teacher materials. These are for you. There's also a link to the official teacher materials, which I'm going to get to in a second. But I'm going to just scroll through it. So there's a lot of standards information here, things you might need for unit plans or lesson plans. There we go. And then we finally get to the part of the assessment that is designed for students to use. So you can see it looks just like a Regents exam. Part 1, stimulus-based multiple choice questions. You'll see all of these items. There are 28 stimulus-based multiple choice questions, I think, in this assessment. There are questions from previous units. There are questions from the current unit. We try to make sure that for each of these end of unit assessments, that a third of the questions are about the current unit. So students are really getting tested on what they just learned. In addition, parts 2 and 3 are focused on information from this unit. So I'm just getting to scroll right through. Yep, there's a 28th multiple choice question. And then here's a short essay question number 1. There's the prompt we just reviewed. And then as I scroll down, you can see the 2 documents here. This is a statement from Herbert Hoover about the Great Depression. And then a statement from Roosevelt. So this first prompt, they're going to have to contextualize these 2 documents. It's going to be about the Great Depression. And then they're going to have to connect the 2 documents in some way. I would probably do something related to turning points or maybe similarities and differences for this essay. As I scroll down, there's a second set. New York Times article about the bonus army. And following that, there's a part 3 civic literacy essay. And this one is about the government's role in the economy. And there are 6 documents that follow that. And each of these documents, as you'll see from this first one, have a supporting question here, scaffolding question. So there are end of unit assessments for every unit. If I'm just going to go back to the New Vision site, this was the student exam. Below it, the item right below it is the teacher materials for that student exam. So if you want to see what the answers are to the multiple choice questions, if you want to check out possible responses for parts 2 and part 3, you can come here. There we go. There are the multiple choice question answers right there on the first page, followed by some very detailed information about each of the stimuli. Just a little key on how to read it. But this is in case you require any sort of additional analysis of your exams. We've identified the stimuli source for each stimulus, if it's primary or secondary, if it's text-based, what kind of text-based, visual-based, data-based, map-based, the specific type of stimuli, the standards information, the word count, the lexile measure. And then we've identified the task model and if it requires outside information or not for each of the multiple choice questions. In addition, you'll actually find some model essays written out. So if I go up to the top again, I can click on example essays and you'll see some example essays that we've written for these part 3s. So they might be a little higher level than what many of our students are writing. But in the future, once we get some students to do these essays, we're going to replace our responses with theirs. So there we go. We got some teacher materials, including rubrics and scoring notes for parts 2 and 3. Cool. All right, so first place I took you was a unit page to show you where the end of unit assessments are. Second place I'm going to take you is a secret part of the site that hardly anyone ever uses. It's where our instructional routines can be found. And to get there, you have to go to Getting Started. Getting Started, and then scroll down to Instructional Routines. Here you'll find a list of all the instructional routines and our friendly little pop-up. Goodbye. The writing check-in cycle for US history, contextualization, sourcing, cause and effect chain. All these things are really helpful. So I'm going to just click on contextualization. This contextualization routine comes with a presentation. It also comes with a worksheet template. Contextualization is a hugely important skill on the Regents exams in both global history and US history. You can see contextualization as being important for parts 1, parts 2, and part 3. On part 1, there's a whole bunch of multiple choice questions about causes. That's contextualization. For part 2, the first bullet in each of the short essays is contextualization. For part 3, students have the first bullet in the prompt is to contextualize the issue. So these presentations are pretty neat. There's some information about instructional routines in these first bunch of slides, which I encourage you to read. And then there are slides that you can use with students. So if I was in a class, I might start off with this slide to introduce it. On the right-hand side, you can see the steps that we're going to go through in this activity. We're going to talk about our objective. We're going to annotate a document. We're going to do an activity called Big C, Little C. We're going to do a gallery walk, and then we're going to contextualize and self-assess. So these slides take students through that. There are some things you have to change as a teacher, like you'd have to change the title of the document and the prompt. You wouldn't see some of these comments on the right-hand side. But you can see here's an annotation protocol we ask students to go through, get them into groups. We introduce the Big C, Little C activity, and then students are on their way. So this routine also comes with a template that you can use with your students. So I scroll down and there's a place for you to put your document. And then there is the formative assessment task that goes with the task, that goes with the activity. So there's some similar resources in all of these instructional routines. Sourcing is really fun. Cause and effect chains are all great. Check them out, and hopefully we'll get a chance to do them in real life together sometime. But there is a third part of the website I really need to take you to. This is the Regents Readiness section of the site. Again, this is not a place you go in March before the Regents exam. This is a place to go at the beginning of the year. And there are 4 options. Regents Readiness for the global transition, for the new global exam, for the traditional US exam, and for the new US exam. So I'm going to go to the new US exam and give that a click. Bye, pop-up. All right, as I scroll down through the Regents Readiness part of the site for the new US exam, there is a link to some general information about the exam. That's the document that was linked to the presentation as well. And then there are some expandable boxes. And there are just a few things I'd like to highlight. Under student preparedness, there's a really great document called My Strategy for the framework exam. This is for students to fill out, where they kind of plan out how they're going to address the exam, what they're going to do to prepare for it. It's a great activity for students to do to make sure that they're prepared. You won't have to really worry about this practice exam because by the time you take the exam, there will have been administrations, so don't worry about that. This one, though, the exam question bank is super important. This is where we keep all of the assessment items that we've written for global history and US history. It's under the same security as the assessments, so you'll have to sign in or be logged in your Google account. But once you are all set with that, you can click on the exam question bank and you can get to all of the assessment items that we've put together so far. Some of these we've written, some of them we've taken from old Regents exams, but if we've taken them from old Regents exams, we have made sure that they still align with the new framework and the new style of Regents, or we've tweaked them a little bit. There's quite a few people in this document right now. So for US history, if I want to get some stimulus-based questions, for example, I click here, and open up another tab, and then I can scroll down to all the topics, all the units and the topics that we have multiple choice questions for. So in case you don't have the same units as we do, uh, we've listed the topics here. So if I want to go to unit 11.5 and I want to grab some questions for students, I can go to student-facing questions, and there'll be a whole bunch of questions that populate. You could even just print this out and give it to students as a quiz, or rather you could make a copy of this and modify it and give it to students. Now the answers can be found in the link that's below the teachers, that's below the student, that's the teacher materials. And if you'd like, you can just look at the stimuli if you want students to analyze those documents or you want to write your own questions. So not surprisingly, we've got items written for short essay questions and for part 3. So check these out. Most of these items will be used in our cumulative exams. So if you're going to go here and try to create some activities for students in a unit, just double check the exam to make sure it's not also in there. Unless you want it to be in there, then you can do it that way too. All right, so exam question bank, very important. Check that out. Here's another place you can get all of the unit assessments. If you don't want to go between all of the units to find them, you can go here and find all the assessments for the new exam. We've got some other resources here that are really helpful. A 15-day Regents prep plan for the end of the year cram. Some multiple choice sprints. These are super cool. We know that students have trouble finishing all of the multiple choice in the amount of time that they have. And we know that time is a real concern on the exam. So Aruna has put together these sprints where you get students to do like 5 questions in 3 minutes, and then it bumps up to 9 questions in 7 minutes, and so on, until they get to the point where we really want them to be. Also here is an annotation protocol for part 1, if you want to check that out. Something we suggest, but I know a lot of schools have their own. And then there is this list of review sheets and concept maps for the full course. I've seen teachers use this throughout Buffalo for global history, and it's really helpful. It's going to be helpful for US history too. Great activity to consolidate information in one spot throughout the whole year, and also to recall information to create concept maps and make connections. All right, last things I want to show you under our resources for part 2, short essays, and for part 3 are these checklists. We've created this for global, and they're very, very helpful for global teachers. So these are both outlines and grading checklists. They're intended to make your grading a little easier and the expectations for students more transparent. We thought, why not combine both the outline and the grading tool? So as it loads, I'm just going to scroll down. You can see the prompt is right here for part 2, task 1. And then we get to the actual checklist and outline as it loads. Come on, here we go. There it is. Okay, this one's pretty simple. So the way this is laid out is that you've got a component to the response on the left-hand side. Got to have your topic sentence. Have some analysis, some outside information. Just gonna scroll back up to where I was. There is a little checkbox for you to identify if it is in the response you're reading or if it's not. And then on the right-hand side is the checklist. And that describes a little bit more of what you're looking for. So for this first response, we want to make sure that students have, oh, here we go. I knew there's missing paragraph. There it is. The first paragraph is about context. We want students to contextualize the event, which means we want to talk about where, when, who was involved, what led to it, and why the events occurred. So as I'm going through a student's response, looking to see if they've contextualized the event, I can check these things off and say, hey, I didn't check off where this took place or when it took place. So I want you to revise this response and give it back to me. As long as students are aware of what the right-hand side means, it can be a really effective way of communicating to them what is there and what's missing. And then same for second bullet, we want them to identify the relationship. We want to say there's a cause and effect relationship between these two documents. These two documents are related to an important turning point. We want them to explain that relationship. We want them to use evidence from both the documents, and then we want to make sure that there's outside information there. So these checklists can be really helpful. They can make grading more efficient, and I suggest that you start with them and then modify them for your own needs. A lot of schools have their own strategies for writing, like some people use the quote sandwich, for example, or maybe you're using step up to writing strategies and you want to integrate that. Go for it. We have the same thing for part 3. The checklist is here in addition to some other resources that we have collected. So if you're on the site, 3 major places to go. The first are the unit pages if you want content help and you want a link to the assessments. The instructional routines where you can get some fun activities that you can use for any content. And then Regents readiness is probably going to be your best friend next year as far as resources that we can have to help you with this new exam. So let me go back to this presentation real quick and just close it out. On this last page, there are the same links that we started with, the US History New Vision site, the Office of Student Assessment site, Office of State Assessment site, the document that has all of the information about the new exam. You can ignore that last one. And then my contact information, tlent@newvisions.org, where I can help answer any questions you have. Hopefully, all this pandemic business will be past us at some point in the spring, and I'll get to see you in person. But if not, I hope you enjoy the rest of your school year and have a great summer. Thanks for watching.